didn't expect me to fight back. That was their first mistake. My father always said the Calloway family takes care of its own. What he never mentioned was that its own had a very specific list, and my name had been quietly crossed off it years before I understood what that meant. I'm the middle child. There's my older sister Renee, who married an orthodontist and lives 20 minutes from my parents in Naperville, Illinois. Then there's me, Claire. Then my younger brother, Derek, who my father treated less like a son and more like a business partner he'd been grooming since Derek was 14. I used to think that was normal. I used to think a lot of things were normal. After college, I moved back home. That was my first mistake, but I was 23 and had $40,000 in student loans and a journalism degree that wasn't exactly lighting the job market on fire. My father offered me a room and a grace period to get on my feet. I was grateful. I said, "Thank you." I meant it. What I didn't realize was that the grace period came with conditions that were never written down anywhere. I just started absorbing them the way you absorb things in a family, slowly, without noticing, until one day you look up and you're in a hole. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week because my mother had her book club on Tuesdays and her yoga on Thursdays and just needed a break on Fridays. I did the grocery run every Saturday. I handled the dry cleaning pickup. When Renee had her second baby and needed help, I drove over and watched the kids 2 afternoons a week because I had more flexibility. When my father's assistant quit in the middle of a busy quarter at Callaway Property Management, that's the family business, commercial real estate, mid-sized but profitable, I stepped in to cover phones and scheduling for what he called just a few weeks. That was 8 months before I left. I wasn't paid for any of it. Not the dinners, not the babysitting, not the 8 months of office work. My father said it was my contribution to the household since I wasn't paying rent. I told myself that was fair. I told myself that for 2 years. The thing about being useful in a family is that eventually you stop being a person and become a function. I wasn't Claire anymore. I was the one who handles things. Renee had her life. Derek had his future. I had a to-do list. I started keeping a notebook around the 14-month mark. Nothing dramatic. I just started writing things down. Hours I worked, tasks I completed, dates. I wasn't planning anything at the time. I think I just needed to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining it, that it was real, that it added up, that I wasn't crazy for feeling like I was disappearing. That notebook ended up being worth more than anything else I owned. My parents' 30th wedding anniversary was in March. They'd been planning it for months. A dinner party at Salvatore's, which is this upscale Italian place in downtown Naperville that does private events. 60 guests. Open bar. A slideshow my mother had been putting together since Christmas. It was a big deal. The whole family was flying in. My Aunt Sandra was driving up from Indianapolis. My father's brother and his wife were coming from Phoenix. Cousins I hadn't seen in 3 years. I assumed I was going to the dinner. I'd bought a dress in January, navy blue, knee-length, fitted. I'd had it hemmed. It's a small thing, but I want you to understand. I bought a dress and had it hemmed because I was going to my parents' anniversary dinner. That's how obvious it seemed. My father told me 2 weeks before the event. We were in the kitchen. He was reading something on his phone. I was making his coffee because that was also apparently my job. He said it without looking up. He said, "You're not going to make the dinner on the 30th. I need you here." I thought he meant something had come up, some logistical thing, some task I needed to handle before we all left together. I asked what time I needed to be done by. He put his phone down. He looked at me in that way he has, that way that's very calm and very certain, like he's explaining something to someone who isn't quite bright enough to have figured it out themselves. "You're not coming to the dinner, Claire. You're staying here. Renee's kids are going to be here Friday night through Sunday, and someone needs to be with them. And I'm having the Brannigan account documents delivered Saturday morning. I need someone to sign for them and get them filed before Monday." I stood there, holding his coffee mug. The kids are going to be here the whole weekend? Renee's taking them to the dinner Saturday. Renee and her husband are attending as adults. Children that age disrupt an event like this. I'm 25. He picked his phone back up. You'll be compensated for the weekend. He said it the way you'd say it to a babysitter, to someone you'd hired, to someone who wasn't your daughter. I set his coffee down on the counter. Not hard. I didn't slam it. I just set it down and walked to my room and sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the navy dress hanging on the back of my door. I sat there for a long time. Here's what I did not do. I did not go back downstairs and yell at him. I did not call Renee and ask her to fix it. I did not cry in front of anyone in that house. Here's what I did do. I opened my laptop and I started thinking very carefully about the last 26 months. The office work was where it got interesting. When I'd been covering for the assistant, I'd had access to everything. Scheduling, vendor invoices, lease agreements, the accounting software. My father had set me up with a login because it was easier than explaining what I could and couldn't touch. I think he assumed I wasn't paying close attention. I was an English major. I did not have a CPA background. He probably looked at me the way he always had, as someone who handles things but doesn't really understand them. He was wrong about that. I had noticed things over those 8 months. Inconsistencies. Vendor payments to a company called Meridian Consulting LLC that didn't appear anywhere in the client files. Lease revenue from 2 properties, one in Wheaton, one in Bolingbrook, that showed up in the internal tracking spreadsheet but not in the figures my father reported to the LLC's managing partners. Derek's name appearing as a signatory on accounts that, as far as I understood the company structure, he had no ownership stake in. Not yet, anyway. Not officially. I hadn't done anything with what I'd noticed. I'd written a few things in the notebook, dates and figures and names, because that's what I did. I wrote things down. But sitting on my bed that Saturday morning holding the hem of a dress I'd never wear to the dinner I wasn't invited to, I thought about all of it differently. I spent the next 2 weeks being very, very helpful. I smiled at breakfast. I signed for the Brannigan documents. I made quesadillas for Renee's kids on Saturday night and put on a movie and let them fall asleep on the couch because they were 4 and 6 and they were not the problem and none of this was their fault. I had already texted my neighbor Mrs. B.R. Okafor before the weekend started and asked if she could be on call if I needed to step out. She'd watched Renee's kids before and they loved her. I made sure I had a plan for them before I made a plan for anything else. I want to be very clear about that. While everyone was at Salvatore's, I was at the kitchen table with my laptop and my notebook and 3 years of careful, quiet observation. I want to be clear about something. I am not a forensic accountant. I didn't do anything illegal. I didn't hack anything or access anything I wasn't technically authorized to access during the period I was employed, even informally, at Callaway Property Management. What I did was compile. I organized what I'd already seen. I cross-referenced the vendor payments against public business registration records. Meridian Consulting LLC, it turned out, was registered in Delaware to a person named Thomas Kessler, which is my father's middle name and my grandmother's maiden name. It had no website, no listed employees, no verifiable business activity. I documented the discrepancy between internal lease revenue figures and reported figures across 6 quarters. I pulled the managing partner agreement, which I'd filed myself and therefore had a copy of, and highlighted the sections about financial transparency and equal distribution of net revenue. I wrote a 12-page summary. I had my college roommate, who was finishing her 2nd year of law school in Chicago, read it. She called me 40 minutes later and said, very quietly, "Claire, this is not small." I didn't go to the managing partners first. I went to a forensic accounting firm in Chicago. I paid for a 1-hour consultation with money I'd been saving in an account my father didn't know about. I'd been putting away small amounts for 18 months, nothing dramatic, just what I could manage, because some part of me had always understood that staying had an expiration date. The accountant's name was Patricia Huang. She was in her 50s and wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she looked at my documentation for 22 minutes without saying anything. Then she said, "How long did you have access to the internal system?" I told her 8 months. She said, "And you noticed this yourself?" I said, "Yes." She looked at me over her glasses and said, "You should have been paid for that job." She referred me to a commercial litigation attorney named Marcus Webb. He was calm and methodical, and he did not get excited about things, which I found reassuring. He reviewed everything, asked for 2 weeks to do his own due diligence, and came back to me with a figure. The managing partners of Callaway Property Management had, conservatively, been shorted approximately $1.1 million in revenue distributions over 4 years. The Meridian payments, which appeared to be payments to my father's shell company in exchange for no actual services, accounted for most of it. I was not the one who went to the managing partners. Marcus Webb was. That's what I paid him to do. I want to tell you about the morning it all came apart because I was not there for it, and I will never not feel something complicated about that. I was at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. I had moved out of my parents' house 6 weeks earlier, into a sublet in Wicker Park that I could barely afford and that I loved with my whole heart. I'd taken a content coordinator job at a digital media startup. Not glamorous, not well-paying, but mine. I was there for a 9 a.m. meeting when my phone started vibrating. Renee called 3 times. My mother called twice. Derek called once, which was unusual enough that I felt my stomach drop just seeing his name. I didn't answer any of them. I already knew what was happening because Marcus Webb had told me the timeline. The managing partners had engaged their own legal counsel. The LLC had been frozen pending investigation. My father and Derek had been formally notified. My mother left a voicemail. I listened to it once, parked in my car in a garage on Halstead, and I have not listened to it again. I will just tell you that her voice sounded very small and very far away, and that she said my name in a way that made me feel 6 years old. I am not a person without feelings. I want to make sure that's clear. The investigation took 14 months. During that time, I did not speak to my father. I spoke to my mother twice, briefly, in conversations that went nowhere. I spoke to Renee once. She cried and said she didn't understand how I could do this to the family, and I asked her very calmly whether she remembered the anniversary dinner, and there was a long silence, and she said that wasn't the same thing, and I said I knew, and we hung up. Derek's cooperation with investigators in exchange for reduced exposure was, according to Marcus Webb, significant. My father did not cooperate. My father maintained, for the entirety of the process, that everything had been above board and that the shell company payments represented legitimate consulting fees for services that simply weren't documented, because that's not how family businesses work. The investigators found this argument unpersuasive. My father was convicted on 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of breach of fiduciary duty. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. He began serving his sentence 11 months ago. Derek received a deferred prosecution agreement contingent on full financial restitution and 3 years of probation. The managing partners recovered approximately $890,000 after legal fees and settlement costs. I received nothing from the investigation. That was never the point. What I received was the $72 an hour that the forensic accounting firm estimated my labor was worth during the 8 months I worked at Callaway Property Management, negotiated as part of a separate civil claim against the LLC for unpaid wages. That came to a little over $22,000 after Marcus Webb's cut. I paid off 4 months of student loans with it. I cried a little, in a good way. The navy dress is still in my closet. I never returned it, and I never wore it. I'm not sure what I'm waiting for. Maybe the right occasion. Maybe just the right moment to put it on and stand in front of the mirror and think about a kitchen in Naperville and a coffee mug set down very carefully on a granite countertop and a girl who decided that being left behind was the last thing she was going to quietly accept. My father thought he was managing me. He'd been managing me my whole life, deciding what I was worth, what I was for, where I fit in the structure he'd built. He built that structure very carefully. He just forgot to account for the person who'd been watching him build it. I live in Wicker Park now. I have a real lease in my own name. I got a promotion in January. I have a savings account and a coffee maker I picked out myself, and a kitchen with no to-do list on the counter. On Saturday mornings, I sit by the window with my coffee and I don't drive anyone anywhere and I don't file anyone's paperwork and I don't make quesadillas for anyone except myself if I want them, which sometimes I do. My Aunt Sandra texts me sometimes. She was always the one who saw me clearly, even when everyone else was looking past me. She said once, after it was all over, "I'm proud of you, but I'm not surprised." I wrote that down. Not in the notebook. That notebook is gone, submitted as documentation and then gone. But in a new one I keep on my nightstand, just for things I want to remember. I think about what my father said in that kitchen, about the Calloway family taking care of its own. I think he believed it in his way. I just think his definition was too small. I took care of myself. I think that counts. I thought a lot about the word deserve since all of this ended. My father believed he deserved loyalty without accountability. He believed that being the head of something, a family, a business, a room, entitled him to operate by a different set of rules than everyone else. He'd built an entire architecture around that belief. The shell company, the unreported revenue, the daughter who cooked his meals and filed his paperwork and was told, without flinching, that she wasn't invited to his anniversary dinner because she had more useful things to do. What he didn't understand, what I think a lot of people in his position never understand, is that every choice accumulates, not in some mystical, invisible way, in a very practical, documentable, spreadsheet with 6 quarters of discrepancies kind of way. He made 1,000 small decisions over 4 years, each one feeling contained and manageable, and they stacked up into something that couldn't be explained away. That's not fate. That's just math. I was not a hero in this story. I want to be honest about that. I was a person who was tired and underpaid and left out of a dinner she'd bought a dress for, and I made a decision to stop absorbing things quietly. The courage in that, if there was any, wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like strength in the moment. It felt like setting a coffee mug down on a counter and walking up the stairs and sitting very still and deciding something had to change. What I did have was the habit of paying attention. I'd been writing things down for a year before any of it mattered. Not because I had a plan, but because paying attention was the only form of dignity I had left in that house. It turns out that's enough. Attention, sustained and honest, is one of the most powerful things a person can practice. It's what separated me from someone who leaves with nothing but a bad feeling they can't prove. The hard part, the part I don't talk about much, is my mother. She knew the shape of things, even if she didn't know the specifics. She watched her husband exclude her daughter from a family celebration, and she let it happen. The way she'd let 100 smaller things happen before it. I don't think she was cruel. I think she'd made her own accommodations over 30 years and didn't know how to stop making them. That's its own kind of trap, and I have complicated feelings about it that I don't think will ever fully resolve. But here's what I know. I refuse to make those same accommodations. Not out of righteousness. I wasn't trying to be anyone's example. Just out of a very basic, stubborn insistence that my time and my labor and my presence at a dinner table meant something. That I meant something. Derek is rebuilding, slowly, under a lot of conditions, but rebuilding. I think about him sometimes and feel something I can't quite name. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet, but something adjacent to understanding. He was shaped by the same household I was. He just made different choices when the pressure came. My father is serving his sentence. I don't wish him additional suffering. I just don't wish him a return to what he had, because what he had was built on other people's silence. I think the most honest thing I can say is this. Nobody saved me. There was no moment where someone looked at what was happening and intervened. I had to see it clearly myself, and then I had to decide it was worth doing something about, and then I had to do it, step by careful step, with a notebook and a lawyer and a sublet I could barely afford. That's the whole story. It's not elegant, but it's mine.